The crew's lounge at night was always quieter than people thought. When the lights outside the studio dimmed and the footsteps thinned, the space seemed to change into a different atmosphere, private, somewhat vague, as if everything was held between slow breaths. Sam leaned against the windowsill, his shirt still smelling of smoke from the afternoon shoot. He raised his hand to gently rub his neck, a feeling of fatigue seeping into every knuckle, but his mind did not want to stop. The door opened slightly. Caitriona walked in, her hair still loosely tied at the nape of her neck. Her studio dress had been replaced by a thin sweater that hugged her tall and soft figure. Every step she took made the space move as if someone invisible was watching. She looked at him without saying anything, just smiled in the same way that he always recognized even when her eyes were closed. "You haven't returned to the hotel yet?" Her voice was small, trying to keep it natural, but the familiarity made the question sound like a light reproach. Sam shrugged, his eyes never leaving her, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "Just a few minutes of quiet before tomorrow starts," he replied, his voice low, then asked again, without really expecting an answer. "You're home later than usual." Caitriona put the script down on the wooden table next to the sofa, then stepped closer to him. Not close enough to be obvious, but close enough that the distance between them stretched with an undisguised vibration. From afar, if someone looked through the crack in the door, they were just two colleagues waiting for a ride or talking about work. But deep inside, there was something older, deeper, beyond the banter in front of the camera. "There's a joint interview tomorrow. They'll ask about chemistry again, about eyes, about what half of them believe is acting, the other half thinks is off script." She said it half jokingly, half as if reminding them of something neither of them wanted to touch on outright. Sam let out a small laugh, a laugh that seemed to catch in her throat. "The gossip did its job, and we just played our part," he said, but his eyes betrayed nothing. She leaned her shoulder lightly against the window, within arm's reach of him. The yellow light from the corner of the room illuminated the curve of her neck, casting a light that made her thoughts fragile. "Sometimes I wonder," she said slowly, "if it weren't for the public gaze, would things be different between us?" Sam was silent. It was a long, but not uncomfortable, silence. He leaned in, close enough for his voice to whisper under her breath. "We never really said where things were to compare." She didn't reply, but her eyes slid over his shoulder and stopped at the rolled-up cuffs of his shirt, as if by unconscious habit. He moved closer, using the silence as a bridge. There was no rush, no promises, just a warm, full feeling between two people who knew each other's limits too well, yet kept pushing against them. The distant footsteps in the hallway made them both stop. They both turned instinctively, like people who were used to knowing when to stop before they were seen. And then, when the sound died down, they returned to their own positions, not touching, but not moving. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice low, "in the interview, if they ask about the rumors, how are you going to answer?" Sam looked deep into her eyes, as if the answer had been there all along but never uttered. "I'll say, things sometimes don't need to be explained, just felt." She curled her lips slightly, not because the answer was clear enough, but because it was enough to make her understand that they were still standing together, whether it had a name or not. When Caitriona stepped out, her hand lightly touched the door, and his hand unconsciously rested on the sill where she had been leaning. No one was there to see, but the air still held her presence like a lingering scent. The door closed, and in the room was only Sam with the warmth that had not yet dissipated. Outside, the night was not yet deep, but the feeling of her remained, so clear that he did not need to close his eyes to see that look, once more. The next morning, the lobby of the hotel where the cast was staying was busier than usual. Reporters were gathered in the lobby area, a few familiar faces from previous red carpets. Sam wore a low-cut cap and a long coat with a high collar, as if to hide his easily recognizable gaze. He was used to walking past the camera without revealing his thoughts, but today was different because he knew she was just a few rooms away. Caitriona stepped out of the elevator a few minutes after him. She wore sunglasses and a beige trench coat that reached past her knees, walking slowly as if in no hurry. When they accidentally met in front of the main door, only a brief glance was enough for no one but them to notice the thin tension that existed. "The car is ready," Sam's manager announced. "Are you going together or separately?" The seemingly simple question felt like a test. Caitriona glanced at him, then replied in a nonchalant tone, "It's convenient to share a car." Sam didn't object, but his eyes lowered in an unnameable breath. Inside the dark SUV, the soundproof glass seemed to create another world. The driver and assistant sat in the front seat, leaving the back seat for just two people. They weren't sitting close together, but even a movement of their hands on their thighs could have touched if one hadn't tried to keep their distance. "You know what they're going to ask today," Sam said softly, looking out the window, where cameras peeked out from behind the trees. Caitriona leaned back, her legs crossed slightly. "Like always. They ask, we laugh, and then they figure it out." Her voice was soft, but her eyes held a layer of ambiguity that he couldn't quite place. When the car stopped in front of the studio, the flashbulbs immediately went off. They got out, not touching, but their steps almost in sync. A reporter called out Sam's name and jokingly asked, "Will you two answer the question about off-script emotions this time?" He just smiled, and Caitriona tilted her head, her lips slightly curled. If it was real, there would be no need to ask. The interview took place with bright lights and cameras surrounding. The host smiled half-hidden, half-probingly. "People often say that your chemistry is not just on screen. What do you think about that statement?" The entire audience seemed to stop breathing for a moment. Caitriona gently turned her wrist, her voice soft but sharp as a thin knife. "A good actor doesn't create illusions, they make others believe in emotions. If someone feels something more than that, it's probably because they're too immersed." Sam continued, not joking at all, "Or because sometimes, real emotions don't need to be acted." A strange silence fell. The host was slightly startled, but the smile remained. After the recording, they separated from the crowd and were led into a private waiting room. The door closed, the noise outside echoed in and faded. Neither of them spoke first. She leaned back against the table, taking off her sunglasses, her bare eyes meeting his in silence. "That last statement will make someone else wonder." Sam crossed his arms, stepping closer. "I'm not lying." She didn't shy away, nor did she look awkward. But her eyes held something like warning, like expectation, like a well-hidden crack. "Rumors will stick with us longer than roles." He answered slowly, but clearly, "Rumors never bother me. It's not being real that bothers me." The words made the space seem denser. She leaned back against the table more, her hands resting on the wooden edge, her eyes neither shy nor surrendering. "What do you think being real means, Sam?" He stopped in front of her, so close that if she leaned in, the distance would disappear. "Not pretending that what's between us is just a behind-the-scenes product." Before she could answer, there was a knock on the door. Her manager said, "We have to be in the car in 5 minutes." Sam took a step back, but her gaze didn't change. Caitriona adjusted her hair, then walked lightly past him. When her hand brushed the back of his hand, just a very small, very light touch, it was a silent acknowledgement. Out in the hallway, they returned to their professional demeanor, standing far enough apart that no one had a chance to talk. But a young assistant who had just passed by had accidentally seen the moment when their eyes met so close that no words could form. The look was accidentally captured by someone walking behind them. The phone raised faster than they could have predicted. That evening, when they returned to the hotel, Sam stood in front of her room without entering. Only a few meters away, her room was closed, silent. He was about to leave when the door opened slightly. Caitriona stood in the dim yellow light, saying nothing, just looking at him with eyes that only the two of them could understand. "We haven't given anyone a definitive answer yet," she whispered. He curled his lips, stepping into what no one else could see. "Because the answer isn't for them." The door slid shut behind him, leaving outside all the speculation, all the rumors, all the cameras trying to see in. Inside, the last distance began to disappear, unhurried, unnamed, but so real that it could no longer be denied.